Hey guys, Drifter here. Today I've got a video for you about communication in dysfunctional families because, well, I grew up in one. I got a little bit of a taste of it again recently, even though I'm an adult now, and I thought I would maybe explain it to some of you that have not had those experiences, and some of you that are in a dysfunctional family now might find it very relatable. The gameplay that you're going to get to see is me playing Titanfall. I go flawless in the first game. Not a super high scoring game, but I do okay, a little bit of a conservative one. Second game, not as good, and the gameplay is relevant not just because it's Titanfall, but because this is the gameplay that I got while on the phone talking to my mother about some very unpleasant things. Said unpleasant things is a little bit of a story that I think might help explain kind of what I'm talking about today. So a long time ago, my brother was something of a troubled youth. My mother was crazy, the home situation was not very good, he was going through some religious and emotional problems at the time, his father just died, pretty much a powder keg for angry teenager. Well, he decided he didn't want to live with his mom anymore because she was on more medical medicine than you could imagine, and drinking and, well, having psychotic episodes and pretending to be possessed and stuff like that. So he wanted to leave and go live with somebody else. The stepfather and mother said no. There was a fight in the house, and as I was told, during this fight, my brother grabbed my mother's arm and twisted it until it popped and broke, and she sent him to something of a short-term mental institution for troubled youth. So in the state of Texas now, he can no longer buy a weapon because he's been institutionalized, which is really fun and makes it terrible for home defense. And this is what I thought for like the longest time. I remember calling him in the place and telling him that, he shouldn't have broken his mother's arm and that sort of stuff. He didn't talk to me. I caught up with my brother recently, and somehow this subject came to be, and when I mentioned it, he was like, wait, what are you talking about? I don't understand. Like, I'm confused. And I'm like, yeah, don't you remember the time you grabbed your mother's arm and broke it? And he's like, no, I never broke my mother's arm. I'm like, well, what are you talking about? According to him, there was an argument in the house. The stepfather jumped on his back. They wrestled, and he wasn't strong enough to take my brother down, so my mother jumped on and tried to pull him down to the ground. My brother, being a larger teenager, just decided, okay, fine, I'll just throw my body weight to the ground and fall on them. My mother tried to brace and stop the fall with her arm, and it broke. Out of spite or vengeance, or I don't honestly know, whatever, she decided to report it as a domestic assault, and he went to jail. Now, what really pissed him off was that my mother went around telling everybody that he broke her arm on purpose, where the reality was it was more, he fell on her. And I mentioned this to my brother as like, dude, I was always, she always told me that you just popped it like for the sheer meanness of it, like because you were mad at her. And because of that, my brother stopped talking to my mother as a result of my miscommunication. My mother's been calling me every day for the last couple of weeks asking me why my brother doesn't speak to her, and when I mentioned that it was probably my fault for mentioning this, my mother mentions that she never told me that, he broke his arm for fun, that I misunderstood, or that I'm making stuff up, and that there was a miscommunication, that her story and his matches, and that there should be no issues here. And it kind of went downhill, so I hit up my brother again. This is like minor kind of stuff and dysfunctional communication. And my brother's like, well, I haven't been talking to her, not about the arm breaking thing, but I've just decided to cut her out of my life. I don't want to have anything to do with mom anymore. I'm going to send her a letter soon. And I'm like, well, can I tell her this so she'll stop calling me? He's like, nah, I'll get around to it eventually. And he will eventually, but in the meantime, I need to keep lying to my mother and distracting her and not telling her anything too unpleasant so that she doesn't blow her brains out. Now, that is just a little example, but there's a lot of other things. Now, that's one little slice. Kids in dysfunctional families do well and to learn to lie and to manipulate other people. These are skills that I learned very well in my family because they were kind of like survival skills. Like from an early age, if you were not able to lie to your family members, there were just going to be fights, and not necessarily because you were doing something wrong, but because family members didn't communicate with each other and they would do different things that people didn't like, and if you couldn't kind of keep them in the dark about each other or keep things kind of on the fly, there would be big fights in the family, which was oftentimes my role, would be like the diffuser. And that's kind of why I hate doing these things now. Like, it sounds kind of cocky to say, oh yeah, I know how to lie, I know how to manipulate people, but it's not something to be proud of. It's something I'm kind of sad of. So that's why this whole channel is kind of built on honesty and forthrightness and doing the right thing, because I try really hard to get away from that kind of stuff. I'll give you another, this is more of a funny example that you'll see. My dad, growing up, he was a bachelor, parents divorced when I was very young. He had a lot of girlfriends. Like, they weren't super high-class ladies, some better than others, but like any bachelor, he had some girls he liked and some girls he was friends with benefits with and other things like that. However, my grandmother never really approved of any of these women. And you're like, okay, well, what does your grandmother have to do with it? Well, they lived across the street from each other, for one, and my grandmother always contributed money to him because he was always a little bit more on the broke side. So my grandmother was almost always giving him money, and he kind of, kept her in the dark about the girlfriends and some unseemly habits like playing pool in the pool hall, which is not, acceptable for the most olden of generations from the Great Depression and that sort of stuff. So if my grandmother found out about my father's girlfriends, or about too many of them for that matter, she might cut off his funding and we would go back to Brokesville in the house, eating sandwiches every day, which is not really where you want to be. And on top of this, my father has a little bit of a temper, and he has a tendency to argue and yell with my grandmother and that sort of stuff. So it was kind of my job to keep them both in the dark about it. Now, my grandmother was always nosy, so she'd always ask me about the girlfriends, or ask me where this came from, or where that came from, or where my dad is. And there was a two-pronged approach to this. Number one, my dad would never tell me who he was dating, who he liked, who he didn't like, or where he was going. He would just kind of go and do his own thing. This allowed me to not have to lie. I could just say, I don't know where my dad is. I don't know who my dad dates. He doesn't tell me. He'd always go to his girlfriend's house and leave him away from home. It was easier on me because then I wouldn't have to lie to my grandparents, but when I did lie, I would give the same answers. I don't know, dude. My dad does whatever he does. He's dating somebody? Huh, first I've ever heard about it. That's funny, And, little things like that. Family holidays are also kind of crazy because in a dysfunctional family, for whatever reason, none of the people like each other at all, but they all want to have holidays, or somebody in the family is liked enough to put together a holiday party and decide that everybody should get together and pretend to have one of those as seen on TV Beaver Cleaver family holiday moment kind of deals, which that was never really my deal. I'm kind of a holiday Scrooge or sourpuss these days for this kind of reason, but the responsibility of organizing holidays fell upon me as, I don't know, about the time I hit 7 or 8, once I was old enough to use a phone properly, I was playing a game called Password. If any of you grew up in split family households and divorced households, or households with marital issues, you know exactly what I mean by playing Password, playing middleman or translator. So, one parent would say to me, hey, I think we should have the dinner at so-and-so's house, and then you'd go talk to them and bring it up like, oh, so-and-so mentioned they wanted me to mention that it should be at your place, and I think it would be a good idea. I think it's my original idea. I think I like it, or this person would like it, and you would kind of have to relay messages between all parties and fend phone calls, and it was like you're like a family secretary, which was kind of weird, to make sure that they all showed up at one place so that you could suck it up and be nice to each other for just a little bit and do your Christmas dinner and then bounce on out. And that's kind of what it was like, for me growing up, and for a lot of you, I'm sure you're doing a lot of the same thing. Just numbers-wise, I'm sure there's a lot of you right now that are in dysfunctional families, and you're experiencing this, and you can do better than this. It's honestly just better to admit that you don't like somebody, or just say that I don't want to have a holiday than just force everybody in the family to suck it up and kind of sit there and eat bread pudding and not try to call each other dirty names, because it's not very fun. Kids growing up in these situations, like myself, also get pretty good at seeing through lies. Well, if you know a person enough, a random stranger or somebody that you don't deal with too often can obviously come up and lie to you because, well, you don't know how to read them. It's very easy to fool you at that point. But you do get a pretty thick skin on understanding lies, on seeing lies in your family, or seeing lies with anybody that you do business with for any regular amount of basis, which is a good skill to have. I'd like to think that's a good skill that I have. The downside is that you don't want to get to thinking that lies are normal. You just accept that everybody's lying to you and that this is normal, that you're supposed to have to figure out what people are thinking and what they're saying and what they're really meaning. And that's another thing that I do. I screw this up all the time. Like, I'm assuming that people are doing double talk, because I also grew up with a whole lot of double talk, which is saying one thing and meaning another, like saying, oh, that dress is lovely, it doesn't make you look fat at all. That's the most obvious example that I could think of. But that was, a lot of my family double talk, saying one thing, meaning the other, which kind of screws me up now because my wife is a very blunt person. She just doesn't do the double talk thing, or, extremely rarely. Everybody is sarcastic or says things like that on occasion, but it's not very common. And because of how I grew up, she'll say something, and I always assume that what she says and what she means are not the same when they really are, and so I'm kind of like being the woman in the relationship, like I'm really overreading everything that's going on, and it leads to some communication problems, which is not a very good thing. If you are a parent and you realize that your household is like this, if for whatever reason you're a parent and you're watching this video and you know that something's not going right with your kids' mother, father, uncle, grandparents, whatever your family unit happens to be, please put a stop to this. Find a way around it. Find a better situation for your kid to grow up in, because this will really screw up the way they communicate and think for the rest of their life. I mean, I have habits now that I might break, I might not. It'll take me a really long time to get around to this and to kind of think normally again. I'm not a super young person, I'm like 26 years old, and I still think this way just because of how I grew up, and I've been removed from home from like 8 years to now. So that's kind of the point that I wanted to get across, and I don't know where else to go with the commentary. It's actually getting close to done. I'm running out of time here at the end, but I wanted to give you some insight into my life and basically make a plea to whatever percentage of you that are parents. Make sure that your kids never have to deal with this. It'll make them much healthier, happier, and well-adjusted adults not to have to deal with this. If you are in a home situation like this, and that's probably more of you, and you don't want to have to continue to lie to your parents, if you don't want to have to continue to mislead and manipulate and play password and set up all the meetings because adults are being too childish to talk to each other, my best advice to you, it's a two-pronged advice. If you are living amongst people that just don't like each other but otherwise have no problems, I would suggest that you just stop doing it. Just stop playing password, stop arranging things, stop lying to everybody, stop all this nonsense, and just kind of let them sort it out like adults. Let them handle their own problems. Don't play that game. Unfortunately, not all parents are reasonable, not all adults are reasonable, and some of you may be stuck in a situation that's a little bit more violent, a little bit more abusive, and it's going to sound like terrible advice, but if you know that if you don't do the things that are expected of you, that there's going to be a huge fight and you're going to get punched in the face, then it probably is just going to be more expedient to continue doing the same things that you're doing. But don't let it get the best of you. Don't assume that this situation is normal, or that everybody lives like this, or that it's permanent, because like the advertising campaign says, it does get better. One of the best things that ever happened to me was just moving away to college and doing my own thing in life and learning how different people, or some might say normal people, communicate and learn and experience things, and it'll be good for you too. So when it's your time, you be sure to move out and do your own thing. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed the episode of whatever this is, not a series. I just hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you learned something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, favorite, and subscribe. Drifter out.